Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. In the description of this video, you can find my compiled link. Through there, you can find ways to support the channel, my other social media, and more. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching. How's it going, everybody? CJ here, back with another video. We're doing a first thoughts today. This first thoughts is on Jolrael, voice of Zhalfir. I've always wanted to build a commander deck around just beating down my opponents with lands. This seems like a great way to do it. Just throwing a bunch of man lands in this deck, turning your lands into creatures, hitting people, drawing cards. Seems like a blast. Super cool design. I love this deck. I think it's going to be a fun commander. I'm probably going to end up building this one. I end up building a lot of these, but this one seems like a really fun one. We're going to hop into this video. The first category we're going to talk about, man lands. Lands that can turn into creatures on their own. Seems great for this deck. Then we're going to talk about ways to buff your land creatures, because there's a handful of cards that work really well at making your land creatures just better. Then we have ways to turn your lands into creatures outside of just Jolrael, which seems pretty important for the deck. We've got a handful of lands that just seem like they'd be really powerful as creatures. There's just a couple of cards I wanted to mention in this section. Then we have some categories that you'd expect to get out of your land decks. We have landfall cards, we have ways to play additional lands each turn, we have ways to get your lands out of the graveyards. If your lands are turning into creatures, they're more susceptible to dying, so graveyard recursion seems really important. We have a few ways to search out non-basic lands specifically, because you're going to want certain lands to turn into creatures, or man lands, stuff like that. We have some ways to capitalize on the card draw that Jolrael provides. And we have a bunch of one-off cards. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think this is going to be a really fun commander, and I'm excited to talk about it and eventually build it. I hope you guys are excited as I am, and let's hop into this. First off, we have man lands. There's a lot of lands that have the ability to just become creatures on their own, and Jolrael makes it so that way you draw cards when they deal damage. So you're going to want to run a lot of these. And some of the man lands that I wanted to mention are Inkmoth Nexus, which has flying, which is very nice. Crawling Barrens, Dread Statuary, Faceless Haven, Fairy Conclave, another flyer, Frostwalk Bastion, Hall of the Storm Giants, Hostile Desert, Inkmoth Nexus, this is got Infect 2, so that can just kind of win you the game out of nowhere, Lair of the Hydra, Lumbering Falls, Mishra's Factory and Mishra's Foundry, Mobilized District, Mutavault, Stalking Stones, Treetop Village, and Dryad Arbor. All of these lands have the ability to turn into creatures, so that way you can use them in your land beatdown plan. Seems like auto includes in the deck, very good lands, good to include. Moving on, we're going to talk about some ways to make your land creatures even better. Some cards that can improve your lands are Embodiment of Insight, Halimar Tidecaller, Tatyova, Steward of Tides, Sylvan Advocate, and Earth Surge. All of these seem like no-brainer includes in this deck. They do exactly what you want. You're going to be attacking with a bunch of land creatures. These make your land creatures way better. Definitely include all of these cards. After that, you're going to want ways to turn your lands into creatures, because sometimes it can be a little expensive to just continuously turn your man lands on. So some ways that you can just make lands into creatures permanently, or at least until end of turn, include cards like Awakener Druid, cards with Awaken like Clutch of Currents, Coastal Discovery, Earthen Arms, Impart the Water Veil, and Rush of Ice, Avalanche Caller, Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi, which is cool because it's at instant speed, Balduvian Frostwalker, Destiny Spinner, Emergent Sequence, which is also ramp, Genju of the Cedars and Genju of the Falls, both the Kamals, Llanowar Loam Speaker, which is another good ramp piece. There's 3 different Nissas that can turn your lands into creatures. Kyrian Druid, Sylvanas' Invoker, that's expensive but it does do the job. Tanos' Tinkering, Verdant Touch, Waker of the Wilds, Wake Root Elemental, that one requires a lot of green mana, but it turns your lands into pretty big creatures, so it could be worthwhile. Woodcaller Automaton, Ren Realmbreaker, Kamal's Will, and Hunting Wilds. That one's another ramp piece, which is nice. If you're going to be turning lands into creatures, there's certain lands that you're going to want to include in the deck because they just have a specific keyword that makes them really good as land creatures, and that keyword is Indestructible. Some lands that have Indestructible are Cascading Cataracts, Darksteel Citadel, and Tanglepool Bridge. You're playing a lands deck. You're going to be playing a lot of lands. You might as well run a lot of landfall cards. Landfall seems like a no-brainer mechanic for this deck. Some good landfall cards include AC, Avenger of Zendikar, Courser of Kruphix, Green Sleeves, Lotus Cobra, Rampaging Baloths, Retreat to Coralhelm, Royal Elemental, Scoot Swarm, Tatiova, Spore Mound, Tireless Tracker and Tireless Provisioner, and Zendikar's Royal. You're playing a lot of lands, you're playing a lot of landfall cards, you're going to want to play a lot of lands every single turn. One of the ways you can do that are cards that let you play an additional land each turn. Some of those include Ancient Green Warden, Azusa, Druid Class, Dryad of Elysian Grove, which is really nice because it also gives all your lands every basic land type, and there's certain cards I'm going to mention that really like forests, so turning your lands into forests seems like a very good idea. Exploration, Oracle of Moldiah, which lets you play lands off top of your library, which is also very nice. Sword of Forge and Frontier, and Wayward Swordtooth. As I mentioned before, turning your lands into creatures makes them much more susceptible to removal. So you're going to want ways to be able to replay your lands from your graveyard. Some ways to do that are Conduit of Worlds, Crucible of Worlds, one of my all-time favorite cards, Aranis, Perennial Behemoth, Ramanop Excavator, Splendid Reclamation, Mending of Dominaria, and World Shaper. This deck is going to be requiring a lot of non-basic lands, and you're going to want specific lands at specific times. So some ways to search out your non-basic lands include cards like Crop Rotation. Love this card. Instant speed. If you have a lot of graveyard recursion, it's just even better. Same thing with Elvish Reclaimer. Then you have Hour of Promise, Nylia's Intervention, Pier's Whim, Realms Uncharted, Scapeshift, and Titania's Command. One of the cool parts about Jolrael is that she lets you draw cards when your land creatures deal damage to your opponents. So you're going to want ways to capitalize on that card draw, some ways to get more out of just drawing the extra cards. Some ways you can do that are Alhammer's Archive into Teferi's Aegis Insight to draw double, and then you have cards with draw triggers like Elandra, Jolrael, Min, Nadir Kraken, and Ominous Seas. Now we're on to the one-off cards. First off, I want to just mention some utility lands that seem really worthwhile in this deck. Those are Animal Sanctuary. Jolrael turns your lands into birds, so you can put counters on them with Animal Sanctuary. Yavimaya to turn all your lands into forests. That can be very helpful with a bunch of cards that I have mentioned or will be mentioning. Thespian Stage to turn it into a manland, so you have an additional manland basically. Or you can just run the Dark Depths combo. That seems like a great game plan. Field of the Dead. You're running a lot of different named lands. No brainer include. Strip Mine and Wasteland seem incredibly powerful in this deck because of your graveyard recursion. Your friends might not like that though, especially when you have additional lands each turn. Very powerful. And then Reliquary Tower. You're going to be drawing a lot of cards by attacking with your manlands. This way you don't have to discard. Another way to get lands out of your graveyard is Life from the Loam. Life from the Loam is a very great card in this deck. Ashaya will turn all your creatures into lands, so even your non-land creatures become lands and therefore draw you cards when they deal damage. Awaken the Woods and Staff of Titania can make land creature tokens. Eudora makes it so when your creatures die, they come back as lands, which is convenient. Sylvan Awakening can just be an extremely powerful card in this deck. Inga and Essica can give you additional card draw because you're going to be tapping your creature lands for mana. Argoth and Titania, along with its meld, seem like a really cool include for this deck. Darksteel Garrison is basically an equipment for lands. Love this card, super cool to include in this deck. Mirage Mirror, Manascape Refractor, and Mirren Safehouse can act as duplicates of lands, and Manascape Refractor and Mirren Safehouse can act as ramp pieces and duplicates of many lands. Those are really, really cool cards to include in this deck. Cultivator Colossus can help you ramp out a ton of lands all at once, especially if you're in a very land-heavy deck. And you can run Abundance if you want to either combo with Cultivator Colossus, or to just kind of filter your draws. Vitalize is just a ritual in this deck. Return of the Wild Speaker is a great game-winning card. There's a handful of board wipes that act as one-sided board wipes because they return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So cards like Consuming Tide, Devastation Tide, Flood of Tears, and Coastal Breach can be extremely powerful in this deck. Trade Routes and Moloku are a cool way to bounce lands back to your hand so that we can get extra value out of them. Both the Titanias seem fantastic for this deck. Both Titanias seem like auto-includes in this deck. They provide a ton of value. Then you have cards that give you additional card draw when your creatures deal damage. Coastal Piracy, Biden of Thassa, Reconnaissance Mission, and Toski. Great cards there. You can run cards like Nature's Revolt or Living Plane. Both those are really interesting, unique cards that you'll be able to capitalize on way more than your opponents will. If anything, it may hurt your opponents. And lastly, there's a couple of cards that just give your creatures vigilance, and if your creatures are lands, that's really good because they can attack and then you can tap them for mana afterwards. Cards like Ferris Band Warchief and Akroma's Memorial seem like great ideas to throw into this deck. Also, Akroma's Memorial will give your creatures flying, trample, haste, and protection, and it'll just make it so you're more likely to draw cards by attacking with your lands. And that's everything I have for Jolrael, Voice of Zhalfir. I talked about a lot of cards in this video. I cannot wait to narrow down to make an actual list, but I hope that I gave you guys some ideas into making your own decks. If I did, let me know in the comments section, like this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, everybody.